Workgroup. And obviously the call is being recorded here. The monthly meeting that we do is today, and this one's going to be a bit special compared to most of them. We have quite a bit of participants today. I see we are mid-40s and climbing here. So I would ask everybody to be very cognizant of staying muted so we keep the sound quality good for everybody. And I would ask anybody who is not going to speak on a phone line and the demo on the computer, just stick with the computer because that's where we're going to be mostly today. I'm Guy Eston. I'm the chair of the OSEHRA Workgroup. So we're very pleased to have quite a turnout. We're at 48. I'll tell you our number of lines available here is 50. So if we hit our limit here and folks can't get on, feel free to pass around word of mouth or otherwise that this entire session will be taped and we'll be posting it on the OSEHRA Workgroup site. And if anybody would like it sent directly to them, just send me an email. I'm the chair on the OSEHRA site. My email address and contact info are all there. So that's sort of housekeeping for this call. There has been a lot of requests to see Vista.js, so we set this call up to be primarily the Vista.js demo. So when we get to it, Chris Lugris from Apex will be providing a demonstration, show you the overview and the full stack, the tools like the RPC Wizard and API browser, and we're going to do an MRAR demo, MRAR being the first consuming application of this service-oriented architecture product called Vista.js. And then we'll do comments and discussion. We have a lot to cover on the demonstration, so I'll ask that we keep questions to either the window, the text window on the call, or we'll be happy to take them after the call verbally as well, but that'll let the demo flow through. So next up is Chris Lugris from Apex, and the screen should be changing over to his directly here, and we'll begin the demonstration.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Chris.
Okay, great. Can you give me 1 second? Just grabbing the app that goes with this thing.
We're just taking a second to move the entry screen over to Chris's screen where you'll see the product.
Can you guys see my screen?
We can.
Okay, great. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo the RPC Wizard, the API browser, and a little bit of MRAR as well. But before I do that, I've got Bob Calico, our architect, lead architect, and I want him to kind of give just kind of set the stage for what really Vista.js is before I kind of get into the demo. So if you can do that, Bob,
yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so VSA Vista.js is a sort of full stack approach to web enabling access to data in Vista. That's kind of at a surface level. It's actually a bunch of tools, techniques, and methods for creating this sort of full stack capability. We began this a couple of years ago actually working on MedRec, which is why we're going to show some what they call MRAR, which is medication review and allergy review. And we ended up creating Vista.js as sort of a necessary way to be able to move forward just doing some prototyping of the ultimate MedRec solution. So we're going to get back to our roots and show a bit of that today. What you're going to see is a developer environment, isolated developer environment having 3 instances of Vista running in the background. There's a federation component, a federator, that will orchestrate the calls to the back end. And there'll be a couple of front-end pieces. There's a web UI where we have something called an RPC wizard, which allows you to restify an RPC. I'll explain that concept in a moment. There's an API browser, which is a Swagger 2.0 compliant viewer for the services available at the different federated instances of Vista. And then we'll walk through a couple of features of the browser that are important to web developers, and we'll show some of the calls after we restify an RPC. And we'll also explain the concept of coarse grain APIs, which are really important. In fact, that's how the MedRec demo works, is we call into a coarse grain API called VPS Reconciliation Services, VPS because it's part of the Veteran Point of Services business unit that was sponsoring the work that we've done on MedRec. And it's an example of a coarse grain API specifically defined to present web-friendly interfaces to Vista. So you'll see the difference between calling an RPC as a REST resource versus calling a coarse grain API that was designed for being called that way. You'll see the MedRec application in action, and we'll be able to show you how it's calling the pieces in the back end. And that'll be pretty much it, given that we've got an hour. We'll get into a lot more detail in subsequent demonstrations starting next month. We'll get a bit more detail into how federation works, how the federator's design, how web applications specifically connect to it from more of a developer point of view. But we figured today we'll keep it nice and high level because there's a variety of different audience members coming to see this today, and we don't want to necessarily get in the weeds right away. So without further ado, I'm going to let Chris walk through, first of all, restification of an RPC. So while he gets set up to do that, I'll explain the concept very quickly. RPCs are the canonical way to call API functionality in Vista, and the usual way people reach them is through something called the RPC broker. The RPC broker is a TCP stateful connection that maintains itself with the client for long periods of time, potentially. It can be pretty chatty, it can be very heavyweight. And what we're trying to show with Vista.js is a lightweight, pure HTTPS way to go full stack to reach RPCs and other APIs. It turns out that in order to call RPCs, there's a lot of FileMan metadata in the background that is there to help make that possible over the web. However, a lot of that metadata isn't quite correct, or it's not, it's not been curated for developers to easily access the documentation about it, which doesn't usually get into as much detail as web developers would need. So what we came up with as an approach was to use the Swagger API itself as metadata, allow a web developer working with a MUMPS developer who knows the RPCs to curate them through the RPC wizard, such that they could be called cleanly and consistently through a web interface. There are RPCs that don't have metadata. There are RPCs for which the metadata is incorrect. So this curation is a safeguard to make sure that it's called correctly. And what we do is we store the metadata in the back end, which is there's a special table for that, or special file they call it in Vista for that. That is governed under XSA namespace, which is a kernel namespace. The X stands for infrastructure. So this is an enabling technology that the VA is in the process of piloting right now on our current work, and we'll be rolling out very quickly in the coming months. So the next step is for Chris to log into the RPC wizard and walk through restifying an RPC, and we'll step through that and explain as we go.
Cool. So one thing I do want to say is each of these components, be it something that talks to Vista or the federator itself or this set of tools, they're all part of this entity called a VSA server. So it's a software server that gets built to a particular profile with a VSA gen utility. So it's pretty easy to deploy. You can actually deploy it on a machine, gen up the kind of server that you need, and then based on the profile you pick, you get different functionality. So a federator profile makes the VSA server act like a federator, coordinates communication with Vistas, among a bunch of other things. VSA server with a Vista profile is the front end to the actual Vista that you want to talk to. I'll show you that in a second here. And then the web server itself contains a couple of tools. If you build a VSA server with a web profile, it contains both the API browser and the RPC wizard. So as Bob said, I'm going to show the RPC wizard first. There's a little bit of security and authorization agreement that you have to agree to. I'll just proceed through that. Then there's a list of Vista servers presented to you. And so these are the ones that the federator knows about. So you kind of wire these up behind the scenes, but then once they're all in there, you can add or remove different Vista servers as necessary. So in this case, I'm just going to kind of stick to Bay Pines. So you need access and verify codes, just like you would on any Vista.
I should note about that, however, that for our VA work, we are also supporting logging in through IAM using SAML STS tokens. That functionality is currently being tested and enhanced as we speak for a future iteration to be deployed to the VA. And the idea there is that a consuming application goes through IAM to obtain the SAML STS token and would forward that on to the federator, and the federator would use that as a login. And so we do support that already. We are able to validate and log in with a SAML token as well.
Right. For the purpose of this demo, though, I definitely need the access and verify codes.
Correct.
So here, what this page does is, since I picked Bay Pines, the RPC wizard goes out and plumbs Bay Pines for the different available RPCs that you can restify. So I can either search for the one that I want, or I can actually pick from, a set of existing ones that have, potentially been restified previously. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to go for VPS get allergies. And you'll notice as I continue to type, it kind of drills the list down. So, if you're looking for a specific one, it's not a big, huge thing. It does it in real time. And once I see the one I want, I can click on it.
Each click of his finger in the text box is a round trip back and forth to the server to get the list that's been qualified by his search criteria.
Perfect. So on this page, there's definitely some things I got to fill out that are required. But here it shows you VPS get allergies is the name that we're about to give this as we restify it.
Note the description. The word allergies is actually incorrect. That's how it is in the Vista in the cache dat file.
Man, you stole my thunder.
Oh man.
So anyway, no problem. So in here in the description, if you're actually reading it, so this misspelling of allergies is actually pulled from, as Bob said, the RPC. The good news is you can fix that. So you can actually add an R in this thing. You can make this description read any way you want to.
One other thing I'd like to point out technically is if you scroll up a little bit back to the top there, you'll notice under summary, we reconstruct the actual call that it would look like in mumps based on actually parsing the back-end routine that's called by the RPC. And one of the things we've learned is that these parameters could actually be incorrectly described in the metadata. So this is an opportunity, the wizard is an opportunity for the person creating the Swagger definition to kind of curate that and correct that. It doesn't correct it in FileMan at this time because there's discussions about the best way to do that, but at least for the purposes of making the RPC callable over REST, once you add parameters to this, you can move them around and put them in the right order. And that's a visual cue of what the right order really is, regardless of what the parameters were that came back from the metadata. So we actually do go to FileMan metadata to build the inputs and the output. And we have learned through hard experience that there are issues there that we try to deal with in a sensible way with the REST wizard.
Cool. And so you can also see that there's input parameters, as Bob was referring to, and there's an output parameter. So lucky for us, VPS get allergies is a pretty straightforward call. So I'm going to go ahead and just add the R to this and go on to the next step. So the next step here, this is actually the API 2.0 Swagger definition, essentially, right?
This is the Swagger 2.0.
Swagger 2.0, yeah.
Generated from the wizard based on correcting any inputs. And this is what will get stored in the back end and be used to validate the calls that come in for that wizard. Once this is saved, and he'll show that in the next step, this RPC is now callable at that instance of Vista.
And as you can see, my R has now been corrected from the description from the step before. So that all looks good to me. It's more of just kind of a review step than anything else. And I'm going to go ahead and save it. And you can see it's actually been posted back over. So now I'm going to go back over to, I'm going to show you how that thing actually works. So I'm going to launch myself the API browser here. Again, another authorization agreement. Very similar interface. Same idea, same available servers. This is pulled from the federator, so if I add one and it appears in the RPC wizard, same thing will be true for the API browser and vice versa. So I'll go to Bay Pines, log myself in. Connect up. So here, I want to speak a little about these available services.
Sure. Okay, so in the Vista profile, which again, like Chris pointed out, is just an instance of VSA server with the added plugins to make it conform to that layer's purpose, which is to restify or to create a web service interface to Vista. There are a number of endpoints that are defined. Each plugin can define itself as a service, and that would give it an endpoint. So what you're seeing here are the available endpoints. Each one of these is their own independent plugin to the VSA server. They're defined as part of the Vista profile, so we make them part of that out of the box. You'll see that there's a lot of things going on in terms of the services that we provide out of the box. The two that we're gonna focus on for the demo today are RPCs and veterans. The RPCs endpoint is where we manage RESTful access to Vista RPC routines, and including the back-end support for the wizard itself. So some of those endpoints are really for the wizard's benefit, but the main feature will be the RPCs that have been restified. And if you were to restify another RPC and come back and refresh this, you'd see this added to the list. It's maintained dynamically because it's data-driven. The veterans endpoint is really for the VPS reconciliation services coarse grain API that I alluded to previously. That's what's actually used by the MRR application. So Chris is going to show you the RPC services where we'll find the get allergies RPC and call it, and you'll see the output. Those of you familiar with calling RPCs will recognize the output. And then we'll go to the veterans endpoint and find the calls that are called by MedRec, and we'll call those and show you the nice JSON interface that comes back from that.
Cool. So here you can see this is an entire list of restified RPCs, and here's my VPS get allergies. So here
you got to go a little slower because it's not updating as fast.
Oh, it's not updating as fast?
Yep, got to give it a second.
Oh.
Use mine as a benchmark here.
Oh, that's a good point. Hold on a second. Are you still online?
Well, I might be disconnected. So does anybody not see the details of the VPS get allergies call on their screen?
I see it.
I see it.
Okay, so it must just be mine.
Weird.
All right, don't let me slow you down.
No problem. So here, in order to test this, I can actually test this restified RPC out now. So it requires a DFN, which I just happen to have in my hip pocket. And when I click to try it out, you get a bunch of different output. So I kind of want to go through each of these in turn.
The other thing to point out is that you are actually logged in. This did log him in. So behind the scenes, we're dealing with all the session management and everything throughout these calls.
Yep. So one thing that's really cool is it gives you the curl output. So if I were to copy and paste this into, let's say, my Linux command prompt or Linux command line, it will actually return the data below here in the response body exactly as you see it here, which is super handy for testing. You can try different things out. You can try different values. So like once you've restified it, and you know how to call it via curl, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it without necessarily using the tool. Also shows you the request URL.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's no parameters here. You know, this just kind of shows you the endpoint that it's actually calling. And then the response body, do me a favor and...
Yeah, so this is actually the text that comes back from the RPC, and you know, we return that as an array of strings, and you can order those and then piece it back together, or just parse them individually once you've ordered them. But you'll recognize these as the common output for the VPS get allergies call. So even in this case, we've sort of made it somewhat friendlier for web developers to consume that, because they're basically able just to deal with an array of strings. The other important point about this is we don't do automatic transformation on RPC calls, because the output of them is so varied. You can't really know what one approach would work. So when you're calling an RPC RESTfully, you're going to get back whatever it gives you, and you have to be able to know how to deal with that. So one of the other benefits of this tool is I could actually cut and paste the entire response and independently work on writing a parser for it that I can prove works in a unit test before I ever call or hook myself up to the actual endpoint, whether in dev, test, or production, or anything, any other environment. So it does give web developers kind of a leg up. There are other features that we'll get into in more depth in the future, like being able to turn debug on the Vista server. You actually get really meaningful information back with the call, with the data, including the inputs that were used and the state of the session at the time that call was finishing, which we do manage on the back end, so that when you call multiple RPCs in a sequence, the state is preserved on the Vista layer relative to the web session. This is a challenge because RPCs were developed in the context of RPC broker, where everything was stateful, and so we have to emulate that statefulness when you're calling into the Vista APIs and RPCs as a result of that.
Cool.
So now let's show them the veterans endpoint.
Yep.
And this is a set of endpoints used by the MedRec application. We have the ability to get demographics, allergies, meds, and we also have the ability to post to those. So we have written some write-back. The main write-back functionality of the MedRec application is concerned with the TIU note. So we have a way to post the TIU note, and there's several steps including calling the RPC for that. But the endpoints here allow the web developer to focus strictly on these pure APIs from a RESTful point of view. And some of these are somewhat transactional on the write-back. We're working on additional write-back APIs for those domains as well. So go ahead and show the allergies.
You know what? Let's do it with this one.
Use
because that was a lot of data.
Okay, so you can see that the return result from calling the coarse grain APIs that we're defining is actually, we were careful to make this output nice and clean and JSON friendly.
Right, as opposed to the one we just showed you, which
Yeah.
was just the straight VPS get allergies RPC.
And the idea here is that the tools that we're providing as part of VSA would allow teams who know the packages in Vista to have a web developer work with a MUMPS developer to implement these endpoints, and to provide web developers consuming those APIs a much clearer interface to the data, both for reads and for writes.
I'm just curious, how do you, you apparently, in this case, you did a JSON conversion. Is that something that you can do that from the API wizard, or is it?
So I'm glad you asked. There's actually two different wizards here. One of which has been implemented, and the other one has not yet. The wizard that has been implemented is the RPC restification wizard, which allows you to curate the metadata about an RPC and such that it can be consumed by a web developer. When it comes to coarse grain, local authoritative Vista data APIs, we have scaffolding that helps create the infrastructure for a plugin like the one here, Veterans, that we've created. The ultimate wizard, which has not been exercised yet by the VA, but we are ready to work on, is going to make it easy to point and click generate the endpoints and as much of the code as is feasible for actual functions and extrinsic functions within the APIs of Vista itself, allowing you to call them in a transactional way. so that instead of calling 5 RPCs over the LAN, you make one call to one endpoint. It performs the transaction calling potentially a number of APIs and then returns a single result. There's a lot of benefits to that approach for performance and for just ease of web enablement for the web developers to create UXs for this. That would be gotten by that. But that's a separate wizard designed to create the local coarse grain APIs like the one we're showing you now.
Okay. By the way, is this is going to the Baypine directly? When you restify that RPC, do you do federation behind it, or is it done automatically?
So that's a good question. That's not really a technical problem. That's a policy issue. And it is entirely possible, assuming that if you can say that we're at the same patch level for all vistas for this RPC, so we know that we've got it everywhere, it is entirely possible to make one call that posts the Swagger metadata to all 140 sites in one call. The problem is one of policy and oversight and governance. And as a result of that, the VA is actually kind of going to be deploying these in a somewhat backward way for now, using KID builds to deploy the RPCs as they've been restified in the file. But there's nothing technologically to prevent, at least to support, let me put it that way. There's nothing technologically missing to support restification of all the RPCs globally. But there are nuances. Not all the sites are at exactly the same level, and so it is sort of sensible not to do that for the most part. But we have designed the tool and the federator itself with the ability in mind to be able to do that very rapidly, through single calls and posts like that, performed by someone with the right authorization to do so.
Is there a potential for a plugin for JLV? The joint viewer?
So in the case of JLV, it could even be simpler. As far as I understand, the Vista Data Service is calling a bunch of RPCs mainly through the VPR, with a couple of others for extra detail. There's almost no reason why, if the user is provisioned properly in Vista, that user couldn't call any of those same RPCs through a RESTful interface. So the task would be to make sure that the RPCs that JLV needs have been restified and deployed to all the sites. And once that's true, there's nothing to stop them from calling the RPCs in a stateless, fast, in-process RPCs HTTP manner through this framework versus the RPC broker, which is what's used by the VDS. So that's one approach. Another approach might be to retool it to consume the VPS reconciliation services, because it's also concerned with all of those domains. And because that is actually doing both read and write back for those domains, it would allow JLV to have a bit more capability there than currently being just read-only. So there's two ways to skin that cat, is what I'm saying.
If the DoD is using Cerner, it's not using mumps any longer, so you can simultaneously use the wizard with plugins to go into a mumps-driven system, and I'm guessing Cerner's like a C+ or something. You'd be able to do both simultaneously? There'd have to be infrastructural support for the VA to call into the DoD that way with right authorization. So that issue is also about access control. But technologically, as long as Cerner has endpoints it exposes over the web, then the federator could be enhanced to be aware of those endpoints. Right now, the VGS Vista router, which is what it gets deployed as a plugin at the federator level to manage communications with Vista, could be expanded to include calls strictly to the DoD side as well, or to fan those out in one call. So that's something that is certainly possible, but it's not what was on our initial operating capability. But there's really no reason why a router the router for Vista Federation couldn't be enhanced to include calling accessible endpoints to also update the DoD side. But there's more issues there than just the technology. There's policy, and then there's of course access control.
Thank you.
But technically, there's nothing to hold that back but a little bit of imagination and some effort.
Some elbow grease.
Actually, before you go on, let me talk about the Federator just briefly, because this will set us up for maybe the next demo. We can talk about Federation more in depth. But our concept of the Federator is a very lightweight thing. It's not trying to do business logic other than what it takes to route and aggregate calls correctly. And you think about it, when you're federating things, you've got a couple different use cases. You've got federating things that are the same, in which case your main task is aggregation. You've got federating things that are different, in which case it's synthesis. And in the scenario you're talking about, you'd be talking about things that are different unless there could be a common interface. And so one of the things we're also working on that's not part of our initial operating capability, but it's in development, is a set of services to support Vista instances describing themselves as via FHIR resources. And if it was true that Cerner also did that, right, or any other EHR that you'd be pointing at, all of a sudden you're dealing with federating things that are, mostly the same. Obviously, there'll be some extensions and different profiles potentially to deal with, but that makes the task of what we're talking about a lot easier, but not impossible even in the case where they're different. But you definitely need to have. We're not trying to solve the mapping problem at the federator level. We're trying to solve the routing, aggregating, and getting data in a form where something that knows the business logic can deal with it. And that's a really important principle that we've tried to adhere to in the development of the stack. Because if you think about it, when you layer things properly, the federator is really just about, it's a sophisticated routing set of algorithms for the targets that you're trying to make act as if they're one entity. And it turns out that there's really big benefits to doing that for web developers, because I can treat, one endpoint and know that, it's going to quote unquote work. So you'll see when we show the MedRec demo, for example, that when you see the meds and the allergies, and Chris, you might want to start moving over to the MedRec demo.
Got it.
When you start to when you see the data coming back from meds and allergies, you're going to see that it is coming from all these multiple vistas. And so one of the nuts that we had to crack to make this work was an efficient way to know, based on the current context, what other Vista instances to make those calls to. And so the aggregating is also about figuring out what's relevant. If you hit all 140 instances of Vista when the patient's only been seen at, say, a handful of them, well, that's kind of not efficient, right? So we have special scoping mechanisms, which we'll get into in future demonstrations, particularly featuring the federator, where we'll explain a little bit how that works. But basically, all calls have to be scoped. The scopes are either predefined or they're dynamic. And the dynamic scope that we focused on for initial operating capability is the scope by patient visited. And that is being used by the MedRec application for getting the data. There's a bit more to the MRR app as well, and we'll talk about that as we go through it just now.
Cool. So thanks, Bob. Again, MRR is just another instance or a VSA server with a particular profile. In this case, it's the MRR profile. So you build the VSA server against the MRR profile. It enables certain capability. I've already launched the application. And again, you have to pick the Vista that you want to log into. Again, I'm going to do Bay Pines for the purposes of this. Log in. And so now what I want to do, I'm going to pick a patient. So I can show a little bit of that federation. It's not going to be super duper clear, but I can show you one interesting patient that we have that has records both in Bay Pines but also in Haley. So I want to show you that really quick.
So while he navigates to that, let me make a quick point about the patients. It says the meeting's over. For me, it says the meeting's over.
Still hearing it.
No, we're still
okay.
Everything's still going.
I think mine just got disconnected. Okay. Whew. Sorry about that. So one quick point about what you see here is we had to actually do quite a bit of work to populate the disparate instances of Vista with different data about the same patients in order to create the use cases. And that's something that took quite a bit of effort. But now we've got it to a place where we can very quickly take a set of use cases and turn them into cache instances that have the data that you need to test. And I think we're among the first folks ever probably to have to tackle that, because our whole problem was from the beginning aggregating data from multiple Vista instances that had to be different in order to show the medication reconciliation workflow in a meaningful way. So Chris is going to kind of walk through this real quick, and then we'll highlight whatever points are most interesting.
Yep. So just kind of along the continuum, so this sets it up for a TIU node, I believe, right, Bob?
Right. So one thing that is you have to understand about this MedRec app is, they are very much taking a baby steps approach. Let's first work within the workflow that the clinicians are used to. This actually would come out of CPRS as a tools API application, basically that routes the browser to the endpoint. In the VA, they would actually be logging in through IAM, and we'd be using the SAML STS token to log them in. Once they're logged in and are in the same context as CPRS, their objective here is to capture in a TIU node that is parsable for subsequent processing by PDOs and whatnot. And so that's the output that gets written back for this application. There's nothing technologically preventing this from being able to write back the allergies that have been added or write back the meds, but there's a lot of business logic and a lot of policy issues that have to be worked out. And so, as we're looking at possibly porting this application to HMP, we're hoping to get some clarity from the VA about those policies. But if the actual writing of the TIU node isn't as exciting as you might think, at least you're able to capture it, and it's able to store it in a definitive, authoritative location, and then the clinicians would make sure the necessary edits happen. There's lots that can be improved about that over time. We were just focused on getting an initial capability out the door for that.
What do you do if there's a discrepancy in the discrete data points from different places, different VISNs? How is that reflected? How is the clinician notified of these discrepancies?
Right. So as we walk through the next steps, you'll see sort of the first crack at that, keeping in mind that we've got in development some approaches that are being, what's the word I'm looking for? They're being kind of QA'd by folks who are looking into the usability aspect of that. But you'll see at least the basic way to break down where the data is coming from. This is not the final MedRec. This is just the initial operating capability, and there is a lot of discussion going on in the IPT forum about the best way to present that information. So that's kind of one of those in-the-weeds detail questions that we could do in a separate session where we focus strictly on the MRR capability. But I do want to highlight that you're right. There's a lot of challenges when you get all these different data points, and there's a fine line between showing enough information to be usable and too much information. And here you run into multiple challenges. Like there's a need to adhere to essential medication directive, and that's why we have some of the things laid out the way we do. But to be realistic, it's not been dealt with from the informatics point of view as directly as many other informatics problems have, because the problem of integrating multiple sources hasn't been a big focus. At least with this application and its initial operating capability, we're able to start to think about, okay, well, how can that be improved? And toward that end, one of the features of our MedRec implementation that you can't see, the thing behind the scenes, is that actually we capture every state change and transition that happens, every interaction, and it's shared across all sessions. So I could have, if you see there's a shared session, which we're not going to demo now for lack of time, but I could have a provider interface and a patient interface logged into the same session, and you could see their interactions. Well, we're actually capturing all of that, what's meaningful about that, and we're able from that to support getting the data in a BI environment where you can do usability metrics, make it evidence-based instead of anecdotal. yeah, everybody gets stuck at step 3, or everybody's having trouble with that particular form kind of thing. Those don't become anecdotal anymore. You can verify them. So we do capture that information on the back end. And again, that's got to be a drill down session because we're only going to have a few minutes for more Q&A if I don't let if I don't let poor Chris finish his demo here.
No problem. So what I want to do is I kind of want to get through these two particular steps. So in this case, I'm going to say, it's a veteran who was unable to participate. I can then go to the next step. And here it actually shows all the different allergies.
So can you also show real quick the back end where the calls were made?
Yeah, I can do it, I think, through the federator.
Yeah, so this thing actually made the call, one call to the federator. The federator fanned it out and pulled all the data back from the disparate sites, and then presented it in a form that the MedRec application could consume. And the MedRec application is actually broken up in 2 pieces. There's a back-end piece called MRR Services and a front-end piece called MRR Provider, and EHMP MRR Provider. And the idea there is the back-end services deals with interacting with the federator and getting the data in a form to be rendered by the front end. So even though they're both running kind of concurrently on the same machine, they're actually logically separated. And that's kind of the pattern that we support with our scaffolding tools in order to properly layer the applications as you're developing. That way, when you know your problem is dealing with some data from Vista, you're going to do it in the MRR services. If the issue is how to render it to the UX, you're going to deal with that in the MRR provider interface. So all the way full stack, we try to enforce good layering with proper interfaces.
Cool. Then if I flip over to the next step here, one of the things I wanted to call out is you'll notice that I'm logged into Bay Pines right now, but it's actually pulling content from Haley, from West Palm, without needing to be logged into there. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure. So one of the things that you have to do when aggregating data from multiple sources is you have to be able to get that data in a way that's auditable. It's not good, and we do not support and never have supported anonymous access to Vista, remote Vistas. What we did was we implemented a web-savvy flavor of BSE. We worked very hard with the kernel team to make sure that none of the essential parts of it were overlooked. And so essentially what we do is we use the BSE login capability to the remote site. So even if that provider isn't provisioned at that site, the BSE protocol allows for a way to do that securely and allows for the session and each call made to be at least logged. It's not perfect, it's not the best world, but that's the kind of the state of the art until IAM is in full force and able to bring the provisioning of users into more unification with the rest of the enterprise. So we actually implement a web-savvy version of BSE where the 13 or so steps that are traditionally done the canonical way are reduced to a fraction of that without violating any of the essential controls. So our implementation of BSE is really aimed at making that whole problem a black box for the web developer.
Beautiful. And the other nice thing, the thing that I find interesting about MRR though too is when I first started kind of like demoing some of this stuff or looking at some of it, I'd heard too about like how this data is pulled from multiple vistas. It's kind of tough to see sometimes if you're just looking at log files. But when I saw it in MRR, I'm like, look at that. I kind of had that aha moment where I'm like, oh, okay, I'm logged into Bay Pines, but this particular patient record actually is spanned across Haley, different Vista sites such as Haley and West Palm, and all of it's aggregated right here for me to see. So
yeah, the other thing I want to point out too is if you go make any changes to this, let's say that we say it's taking as directed, you'll notice that we got this little progress bar that as I check these off is showing my progress. Okay, and so I can go back here if I realize that I didn't do anything on that page. I can say that it is an allergy or it's not adverse reaction or allergy, and then I can confirm that I'm done with allergies, and then you'll see that now. Am I missing one?
Yep.
I missed one. Yeah.
Right
okay.
there.
All right. So, and I can also put in a comment like this occurs infrequently. Again, I'm not a clinician, so don't shoot me. The point is that when I get to the place over here in the TIU note, you'll see each step along the way is being generated in the TIU note, and you'll see, let me just get over there. Where to go? Am I just not seeing it? Probably. Oh, okay, I'm in the wrong.
Keep going.
Yeah, sorry, there we are, amoxicillin.
Yeah.
So you'll see too that the state of it has been preserved, and I can still, let's say I forgot to do medications, I can focus on one of the medications. Hold on a minute.
Hold on.
Yeah, can you do that?
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so sorry, we're fighting over control of the mouse here. So if I click on one of these, rather than cutting and pasting text note, I actually can make my edits here. And again, you'll see that I'm able to deal with the, getting past all the necessary steps. And because I'm at this page, it's warning me I'm not complete. So I definitely want to try to at least go through and check those off right now. Okay, not taking.
So a question while you're hitting all the checkboxes here. How does this compare to EWD?
Sorry.
Because a lot of what I see here looks very similar to like the federator and how to log in with RPCs and everything. All looks very similar to EWD.js, and at least there's certain parts of the community that are already starting to enhance kind of what EWD.js is doing in this realm. So what's either the relationship or what's really dramatically different between the two architectures of what's there with EWD.js that's been in open source for quite a while?
Right. Okay. So the answer to that question is a long one. It is 10 minutes. I'll address it this way. So we did do the original prototypes using EWD.js, which was very convenient for prototyping, and it was very helpful to sort of flesh the concepts out as we were moving very, very quickly with the customer to flesh out the MedRec use case. The reasons why we moved away from it as the core of the server is that we found a framework called Action Hero, which is what we're using, that is much more about being an API server. It has a lot more built-in out of the box for dealing with things like jobs and dealing with caching. And it also had a clean plugin architecture that was very consistent and easy to target. So it's kind of like the 80-20 rule. When we began to understand the full breadth of the VSA requirements and what they were asking us to do from a architectural standpoint to facilitate rapid development of these kinds of things, we decided to use Action Hero. It was just much more full-featured for that. And Action Hero has also open source for a long time, has a much larger contributor community, and it has the other advantage of having been proven in environments where there were heavy loads. So we made the decision to do that based on an understanding of the bigger architectural objectives of the VSA project, which we were becoming part of as our work was sort of formulated by folks within the VA last year. We just felt like it would be a better experience for developers and for us to build on that framework, given the expanded needs of VSA. That said, there's nothing about VSA Gen that can't be in an open source environment modified to support other frameworks, whether EWD or others. The thing about EWD that I think folks have in their minds is that it supports it's supporting cache, but really what supports the cache interface is cache node from InterSystems, and we didn't find any difficulty using Action Hero as the web front end with cache node. So it wasn't like that was a showstopper for us that EWD supports that. It was any node web framework could be used with it. I mean, you could use Express if you wanted to. So VSA Gen itself, we had to make a decision on what we were going to build on for VSA, but we built it in a way that's extensible. So within VSA Gen, There's ability to support not just other frameworks within Node. There's also sort of placeholders there for different platforms and frameworks on different platforms. So, for example, the JVM or other targets. What we really tried to do with VSA is make it more about generating services across the architecture, and more about, it's kind of like a veteran services assembler is how we've looked at it from a design point of view. The Vista part of it is actually just one profile, right? It's just the Vista profile. And if there were other databases that might be something worth including or web enabling, there's no limitation that you can only use a cache instance with our framework. We deliberately decoupled those two concerns so that if your target is Oracle, you can create a web interface right to Oracle. If your target allows you to connect to some other kind of database like MarkLogic or something else, it's just a matter of creating another profile and then implementing the plugins around that profile specifically to support it. And we just found that easier as an experience for us as developers to use something that was a bit more enterprise focused.
Why don't you have an ability to reconcile what the medications, when the fill dates were, that the medication is being taken as directed, rather than relying on the horsepower from the historian to figure that out? You have the information there. Why can't you just put it together and say, that way the person doesn't have to say they're not taking it. If they're not getting it, they're not taking it. And a simple little branch logic would be able to click not taking it.
Okay, so as developers, I see all sorts of ways that might make sense to me to handle that, and we have clinicians on board, and we're working with the IPT. Let's just say that those requirements are not dictated by us. They come from the MRAR IPT group, and we are very faithfully trying to implement exactly what they want us to. There's lots of vigorous discussion on that IPT about the right way to present this information. And I think that it would be good for you to perhaps join in on that IPT and participate in some of those debates. I'm not a clinician. I can't defend every decision that's been made. A lot of this has been collaborative between a number of stakeholders within the VA. So for historical context, when we were working on MedRec originally back in 2014 of October, we didn't even know, but there were 6 or 7 or 8 other efforts trying to do MedRec at the same time. We didn't know that.
Bob,
and then eventually
let me jump in for a second. This is Doc Greg Short.
Yeah, Doc.
There's all kinds of possibilities here. Even though the fill date expired, they might have something from previous time in their medicine cabinet, and they're taking it as directed, even though it's expired. So there's a huge amount of logic, and there's a huge amount of possibilities that have to be accounted for. Is this perfect? No, it's not. But I think it's a reasonable step that's undergone very heavy-duty usability testing. And one thing that you're not seeing here is that the session is initiated actually with a patient-facing interface. That's going to come in the future. And they fill out the discrepancies ahead of time, and it's up to the provider who reviews that to reconcile, do the final reconciliation, which appears in the TIU note. So this is
that would be much less labor intensive and desirable.
Absolutely. And the people at the VA have been working on this for 8 years, and some really smart, good people who are very plugged into the pharmacy package. And I can guarantee you that every decision on here, this is not our design. This is their design. That they've worked on for years. They can justify. Is it perfect? No, but I'd be happy to carry on a sidebar conversation with you about the rationale behind.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, and let me just, for those who don't know, that was Dr. Greg Shore. He's our CMIO at Apex, and he's been on this from day one, working with. Initially, we were working with the folks from Portland who've been working on it, and then as the MRAR effort, the MedRec effort, became more unified after a kind of bake-off last year, we have a lot more stakeholders involved in helping us to fathom all the different possible ways this could be implemented and to put a roadmap together that we can work iteratively toward a much better MedRec solution. But that, yeah, Doc Shore has been, Doc, can you just say a little bit about yourself for those who don't know real quick?
My background actually is with the Indian Health Service, and I was on the team that developed the RPMS. I've worked with them for 20 years. I taught as an adjunct professor, Homer Warner's department at University of Utah for a decade, and I've been with Apex now for almost 5 years. That's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Doc's a disabled vet who gets all of his care from the VA and a clinician,
oh, yeah.
So he's got a 360-degree view of this problem.
Right.
So I think as far as the quick demo, we're pretty close to done. I want to give, we got about less than 5 minutes, actually 3, so I can take maybe one more question before we wrap up.
Do you have a worker queue process that works behind this, or is it like single process, single queue, and how it works with Node.js?
Okay, so the Action Hero comes out of the box with extensive support for clustering through Node Cluster, which is basically how we kind of queue up multiple quote-unquote workers, as you call them. So it works single process because we use the asynchronous APIs. So even if you only have one process, it's non-blocking. There are lots of work was done in the IOC timeframe that we've been in the last 6 months to come up with a clustering and failover and reliability strategies for this that conform to some of the limitations and constraints we have within the VA environment. And we've got a pretty well vetted approach now to that clustering solution that works within the context of how the actual vistas are deployed, which isn't necessarily intuitive, and don't really have time to explain that now. But the way they're deployed, we had to take some special strategies to manage that, and we use Node Cluster on a given instance of a server, and we rely on other mechanisms to keep the state between multiple instances. At a very high level, probably not very descriptive, but we definitely went through a lot of rigorous design with the ESE people who are actually maintaining vistas in the field and have a real good grasp of that problem.
My context is more along the questions when you're trying to service a request. So even though one of those cluster processes might be working on something, is that whole cluster process working on that exact one job at any given time, or is it working on more, and then what's the because cluster only works at the higher level. I'm looking for a little bit lower level in that question.
Yeah, so no, when you know it's not working on just one job. It's working on as many as are coming in that it's configured to support. So there was a lot of testing done on our framework by the folks. I'm trying to remember ETS group. They ran some significant load tests on it, and it was some 400,000 or 500,000 transactions under load, and never got above sub-second response time in most recent tests, and it was pretty much purring along at around 0.3 seconds, something like that. And our login's very fast, takes about 0.6 seconds, and so performance and the ability to take many calls simultaneously is obviously a non-negotiable feature of such a framework. So that's what it is. Any more questions, or Guy, do you want to wrap it up, or what do we want to do?
Oh, I guess we're at the top of the hour, so I appreciate everybody's time. There was quite a turnout on this. There will be a copy, or link actually, to a recording of this whole session, the screen and voice, for your reference, or if somebody missed it and would like to get a hold of it, that you can let them know that'll be there. It'll be on the OSEHRA Vista.js Workgroup site, Also, I'll be happy to send it to anybody who's looking for it as well. If you just email me, my name and contact number are on that site as well. And that's pretty easy. If you're not an OSEHRA Workgroup person, like many aren't on this call, you just go to OSEHRA.com, navigate on their page to the workgroups, look for Vista.js page, and you can see it right there. So it's pretty straightforward. But we do appreciate everybody's time. We'll post this and distribute it, and would also be happy to field specific questions. You can send them to me. I'll get them out to the team if you have follow-on questions from the demonstration.
And again, we'll be doing more deep dives in various aspects of the full stack in future demonstrations and future meetings like this. So if there's things that you guys or anybody out there really particularly wants to focus on, let Guy know, and we'll make sure we put together a nice set of demonstrations in the coming months to get deeper into the weeds with it.
Any last questions or logistical details from anybody? Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. This will close the call, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Great demo.
Very good. Very good.